We're here today to show everyone how to make a master cast. There are many times when we're doing multiple units of bridge work that we can't get an impression that has every single die within that one impression. In fact, we have a patient here for whom it took 3 separate casts for us to attain these 4 dies. On these 4 dies, we cast 2 single abutments and 2 abutments that each had pontics attached to them. But certainly, we have to solder all of these abutments together for the bridge. So the components are fitted intraorally, and then a solder transfer is done as you've seen described before, and then the soldered bridge is tried back in, and here it is. So here we have a bridge that extends from tooth number 22 through tooth number 28. We had 1 separate die on 1 cast for number 22. We had another cast for 23, another cast for 27, and another cast for 28. The solder joints then were between 22 and 23, between 24 and 25, and between 27 and 28. We are now going to begin the fabrication of a master cast. A master cast is a cast upon which this entire bridge will fit so that it can be articulated with the countercast on the porcelain application that may then proceed. In order to do this, we will be taking an impression with impergum with a stock tray. And the only critical feature is that we inject impergum underneath the pontics, so that both on the facial and on the lingual side, so that we get a nice impression of the tissue surfaces against which the porcelain will be built on the apical areas of the pontics. Now, there's going to be a little bit of metal modification along the way. We are still a little bit too long incisally. Close, please. We're in contact, and we have to provide room for incisal porcelain. We also have to, open wide again, reduce some of the facial bulk, particularly of the gingival third of the pontics, which is not quite in proportion with the natural abutments. So that all of this has to be prepared. We could do it now, or after properly articulating the master cast with the counter, we can do it in the laboratory, which is frankly much easier for the dentist and for the patient. So that's how we'll proceed. So we're now going to take the impression, and the next thing we'll show you is the completed impression. Here we have the pickup impression of bridge 22 through 28. And you'll notice that in the area of the pontics, you can't even see the metalwork because a very fine job was done of injecting the impergum underneath the pontic areas so that we have an excellent representation of the soft tissues in this area. Now what we need to do is to fabricate a master cast from this impression. This will be done by first lubricating the insides of each one of these units with a thin film of Vaseline. Next, a layer of beading wax will be placed around the margins of each one of the abutments. Now, let me show you schematically what that entails. Let's say that this is the flat plane of the impression, and each one of our abutments is looking at us like this. Inside view then, what we'd see is a little ring of the abutment popping out above the flat plane of the impression material. What we then need to do is to place a thin little liner of beading wax on the top of the abutment, have it come down on the inside about 1 millimeter and on the outside about 1 millimeter. It's almost as if we took a donut, a regular round donut, and stuck the tube of the casting into it down about halfway so that its total margin is protected by this gasket of red beading wax. Now, the rationale behind that is as follows. We're going to fill up each one of these units with Duralay. We are then going to put a little retentive paper clip into each one of these as we do them, one at a time. Once the Duralay has set, this impression will be beaded and boxed and then poured with vacuum-spatted dye stone. The rationale for covering the margins with beading wax is to prevent the Duralay from being directly in contact with the stone, trapping the margins. If we were to fill this right up to the top with Duralay and then this with stone, we could bend these margins trying to pull the impression from the cast. So by providing this relief of a gasket of red wax, we don't have to worry about this Duralay touching this stone. Now, when we pour up those Duralay pegs then, they're not going to represent the margins of the crown. The margins are going to be obliterated by this red beading wax. That's fine. We're not trying to make copies of the dies. What we're trying to do in the final cast is have Duralay space maintainers to hold the position of the bridge relative to all of the other abutments in the arch. Okay, what I'm now going to do is to lubricate the inside of each one of the castings with Vaseline. Can I have a pair of cotton plugs, please? I think that these are so small that the cotton stick is too big. So instead I'll get a smaller cotton applicator. Found some cotton in the middle of this cotton roll, which is handy. It's a good place to look for cotton. And that's smaller. Okay, that's step one. Step number two will be applying the beading wax around the margins of all four abutments. And I'll show you that after it's completed because it will be a little tricky for me to do in such a fashion that my hands won't block the view. So, I'll be right back. Alrighty, at this point now you can see that the beading wax has been added to the margins of all four abutments following the application of Vaseline. So the next thing we're going to be doing is individually, one by one, beading and flowing Duralay into an abutment, and before that Duralay has a chance to set, we'll be putting a retentive paper clip into it. Now, to show you how we do that, first of all, we have these. Those are paper clips. All right? This is sort of what a paper clip looks like in the natural state. Again, Exhibit A, the natural paper clip. When I'm finished with it, it will look like this. You will notice that it will have a little loop at the bottom and little arms that go off into space. The little loop will be placed into the abutment, into the soft Duralay. These little wings or arms, take your choice, will go up into the buccal and lingual aspects of the trough that is inside the impression, and will be sitting there waiting for stone to be poured upon them. I shall now bend one of the paper clips. We start by doing this. There's the little loop. Can the camera see the little loop? Yes. Thank you, camera. I will now create the little wings. But first, let me have this and see what angle I need for this abutment. That looks reasonable. And there we are. That would drop in. So I'll now cut off the excess. I am now going to bead and flow Duralay into that abutment and then push this down into position so that the little knurled part or twisted part is within the body of the abutment. I'll then do the same thing for the other three, and we'll be back again in a moment or two. Okay, I've just used the bead and flow technique to fill that abutment with Duralay, placed the bent paper clip into the Duralay, and I'm waiting for the initial set to occur. I'm not taking my hand off the paper clip until the initial set has occurred, because otherwise it would flop in some direction. See, it's still a little on the wiggly side. So we'll sit here and wait for it to solidify. Now, the reason why I don't fill them all up at once is I don't have 8 hands. And since I need to hold each one of these in place with 2 hands for the initial set, it's much easier to do them one at a time. Okay, then, here we are with the Duralay abutments in place, and the retentive paper clips have been put into the Duralay individually as each one set. There's one thing that I would like to point out. You'll notice that there was no wax smeared over the area of the tissue surface for the Pontics. As the wax was applied around the perimeter of each one of these abutments, I was very careful then to trim it away in the Pontic area so that we'll get a nice clean representation of the tissue surfaces. This is now going to be beaded and boxed and poured in dye stone. After the stone has set, it will be separated, and we will show you the master cast with the units and the Duralay abutments. Please remember, you do not saw these casts. These are not working casts. They are not intended to be pindexed or sawn. They are to be kept intact so that they serve as a spatial relationship guide for this bridge along with its adjacent teeth. Here we are then with our beaded, boxed, and poured master cast impression. So now the fun part. It's time to take it apart. And I'm showing you this part of the procedure for no particular reason whatsoever. Okay. Alrighty then, here's the master cast with the Duralay abutments, and the bridge is still inside the impression just as it was when the impression was first made. So now what we'll do is take a knife and cut across the impergum right below the Pontics so that I can then pry out the bridge. So I'll proceed to do that. And here's the bridge. And now we'll take the bridge and insert it right back down on the abutments, and here we have a master cast. Now at this point I'd like to say a word or two about the distinction between a working cast and a master cast. When you take your original impression of the tooth with retraction and so forth, and pour up that cast. That is both a working cast and potentially a master cast. For a single crown, you'll be using that cast to fabricate the metal coping, and then it will continue with you as you go to the laboratory to have the porcelain applied. But when you're doing a multiple unit restoration, such as this bridge, you may have, as we did here, 3 separate casts necessary for the fabrication of the metal substructure. But after the bridge is soldered, the soldered bridge would not fit on any one of those 3 individual casts. So those 3 individuals upon which the wax-up is done and the metal is fabricated are working casts and can never be masters for the porcelain application. In this case, this is the one and only master cast.